Hey, welcome back to the podcast. As you can see, if you're watching this, I am in studio, a little different studio with my good friend Adam Katzen. Welcome to my studio away from the main studio.
Thank you. It's very fancy.
For those listening, well, you just heard from Adam, so he is here. And we are business partners. We're friends. We're business partners in a venture called 360 Consulting. There's things flying around here. 360 Consulting is bringing both Enneagram, which many of you know, personality typing system, along with business strategy, leadership development, business development to companies, to organizations, to corporations. So this is not our first official podcast together. We did one before, and it got such rave reviews that we're back again. So we're going to talk today a little bit about what is our 360 Consulting venture, and then get into one of our focuses, which is leadership. You want to talk about 360 Consulting?
Well, no. I think it all boils down to leadership. And, rather than... This is, okay, decent segue. So this is one core component to leadership to me. Show, don't tell. A leader demonstrates, a leader inspires, and many other things that we'll get into in this podcast, and how they do it. So I could sit here and talk about 360 and how it's different in all of the bullet points that anybody would give. And anybody listening has probably heard it all before. Anybody that cares about leadership. That stuff doesn't matter to me. What matters is what underlies, those strategies. And we can have a trademarked system, and we can talk about Align 360 and this model that we've created that is very new and different. But I think much more powerful to me is to demonstrate what informed this approach and why we're doing it. And that is, I think one of the reasons is the canyon, the absence of leadership in corporate culture today.
Yeah, I totally disagree. I'm going to tell you about 360 Consulting.
This is why we work well together.
I am going to do a little bit, but it's in line with what you're talking about. I've counseled people for a very long time, and especially business men who are in business versus women who are in business. I see it more pronounced, though I think it's true regardless of gender, which is there's the business version of me, and then there's the personal version of me, the home version of me. And as I'm counseling people, again, it really is more pronounced in men. That doesn't work. It's not true. Life doesn't work that way. It's holistic. It's 360, right? And really for me, the name isn't just, cute. It's representative of what I've set out to do in my life, which is help people live with wholeness, integrity. There's one version of you at work. There's one version of you at home. It's the same version. You don't need to compartmentalize your life. It doesn't mean you have to be the same, energy and rhythm and vibe at office as you are at home. But it means you're not compartmentalizing or changing your essence, your core, your values.
And I guess that part is worth giving voice to. Why did we decide on 360? And that holistic view, and I think holistic has gotten in our culture, means different things to different people, but to me, it's just an encompassing view. And the reality is what happens at home, what happens with your kids, what happens in your relationships, what happened in your childhood. It impacts your ability to lead in organizations. It impacts your ability to lead in family systems. And without taking a look at some of those things and the conditioning that was created and the defense systems created and where there are fears, and you can't really be an effective leader. So yes, that is one component of 360, is to take a look at all of the components, not just how I'm showing up in my C-level role, how I'm showing up in my life and how that is affecting my role in business.
Yeah, and it just reminds me that, leadership, because we're talking about leadership today specifically, so what? It's not confined to a business, right? Family systems, being in your family, you're a leader, you're a parent, you're a leader, right? So leadership isn't contained within some little segment of society. So yeah, I think this is a good segue. Thanks for participating. I know you were very resistant.
And that's, that piece, and I guess I'll start here and then I want to ask the question, like, what is leadership? Because I think there are so many different ideas. But I think a lot of times people feel like leadership is attached to authority, and I don't feel that way at all. In a different part of my life, I do some clinical work. I lead therapeutic groups and clinical individuals, and I don't have authority over that population, over that group, nor would I exert it if I did, because that's not what leadership is. It's not directing people and telling them what to do. Let me ask you first, and then I'll come back to me. What is leadership? What's a leader?
In Hebrew, the word leadership comes from the root word of the way, the way. And that's, to me, what it gets into leadership is walking the path, or another translation is the path. Walking the path. Yes, showing people a way, but being on the path with them, right? In the Israeli army, it's a very flattened power structure versus the U.S. Army. There's very few generals in relation to the troops, and so it's a lot less theoretical where a leader is sitting behind the lines calling out the orders. And there's this saying in Israel, it's acharai, and that's what true leaders say, is that means after me. So you're charging forward and your troops are following behind you. And so it is your showing, not telling. And it's your walking forward, going down a path, paving a new direction with the people whom you're supposedly leading, and doing it, again, as part of them, not above them in some hierarchical structure, and you have the title and they don't.
And for me, that's definitely a component, right? I don't know, have you ever seen that meme? It's like on the top it says boss, and he's sitting in like a chariot with people pulling it and with a whip, and then below it says leader, and he's out of the chair, he's at the front of the pack pulling it. Mm-hmm. So yes, that's a component to me, for sure. And there are so many other nuances to that, because he can be out in front but a terrible communicator, or not aware of all the things that are influencing, and just, come on! And it's not really an effective strategy. Mm-hmm. Because if you're just out front pulling, there's a quote that I love, and I forget who said it, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but the gist is, if you want to build a boat, you don't bring people together and assign them chores and tasks. You don't set them about to collect wood and materials. Instead, you first inspire among them a yearning for the endless immensity of the sea. And you start there. So it's not enough to just be at the front pulling the thing.
Good point.
And then there's more than that to me.
Well, at least we have a framework. I do like, and it seems like you're with me on this, the sort of path, the way, the direction, right? Having chosen the direction was a starting point. There's 360, and that's great for a brand, but it's not so great for at times in life when you have to pick a way, a direction. We have to make a choice here. And so a leader has already chosen. They've come down from the throne. They're out in the trenches or leading us. And then I would sort of sum up what you just said with the difference between motivation and inspiration. Once was told to me, motivation comes to us from the outside. Inspiration comes to us from the inside. So it isn't that he or she is motivating us. Well, first of all, it is he or she is in communication with us, and they're bringing us along, but it's not merely motivation, it's inspiration. It's waking up that something within us?
Motivation and inspiration. And this is where I think a leader sort of carries the torch to spark that thing, that inspiration that needs to be tended to within the individual. But the question is, look, these are all great abstract concepts that I think get people's head shaking. Like, yeah, we all need motivation and inspiration, but how? How do you create that in someone? I listen to all these podcasts, and it's those things. If you know your why, you can endure your how. Great.
What's my why?
And, like, is it a false summit because of all that holistic stuff, all the other stuff in the background? Is it my actual why? And how do I navigate the how? Because the how sucks sometimes. So it's the nuances. And you hear that when you treat someone as they are, they become less than they are. And when you treat them as if they already were who they could potentially become, they become that, and that's leadership. Again, how do you do that? And to me, it starts with care. And this is, I think, one of the core differences and why we wanted to do this thing together. Can analyze a P&L, right? This is why private equity guys do very well. Can analyze big data sets, figure out what they mean, create a path forward. Strategies that grow the business and mitigate risk, right? Is that leadership? Is that you're creating quarterly returns? The problem with that, and I did that for a long time, right? That was leadership because the margin looks good and the quarterly returns look good. And what I realized there's this missing component. People execute those strategies. And when you direct someone on how to execute something within a strategy, a task within a strategy, they are compliant. You have authority, you tell them what to do, so they do it. That yields a very different bottom line result than commitment. And people become invested and committed in what they help to create. So you don't direct, you co-generate that vision. I think it's good to great, might be something else that says everybody wants autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And you just have to lay those breadcrumbs, not direct someone on how to do it. But again, how do you do that? Because leaders are busy.
Well, I would back up once again. Like, we're going to end up further back than we were forward, but that's very Buddhist, and I know you're a Buddhist. So, for me, and one of the reasons why I got into leadership development and not just staying sort of my lane, which is coaching, counseling, therapy, individuals, because I see that what works in therapy, what works in counseling, coaching is necessary in leadership position, and that is know thyself, right? That is a level of introspection, having done the work to clarify, what do I believe? What are my values? You say, how do you know your why? This is how you know your why. You start drilling into the bedrock of who you are. You start challenging assumptions. You start really looking at yourself with new eyes, fresh eyes, and doing an honest assessment, and taking responsibility. And that's a big word we need to come back to, because the true leaders I see are the ones who are willing to take what I call radical responsibility, like absolute responsibility for even the circumstances that have victimized me, to take responsibility for those too. Not that, to blame the victim when they're victimized, but what's my role in every situation? And so to me, that is the starting point if you want to get onto that path that we're talking about.
And that path is not an easy one. The journey of self-discovery, know thyself, on the examined life, you don't typically love everything that you find.
If you do, you're not doing the examination.
No, you're doing it wrong if everything's rosy.
That much I can tell you.
Yeah. Most people prefer the pleasure of illusion, right? So they wrap themselves in that warm blanket. And it also requires a level of fearlessness, I think, and it requires a level of humility. And when leadership has been tied to authority and having the answers for so long, we've created a culture. I wouldn't say it's narcissism, but there is a culture of I know, I'm right, I have the answers, I'm the leader, and the absence of humility to take a look at oneself paints every interaction that leader has. This was one of the most powerful lessons in leadership I ever learned. So, you know who David Rubenstein is?
I feel like I should.
Founder of the Carlyle Group. Was at one point third largest private equity in the country. I don't know where they stand today. It was over $500 billion in managed assets. This guy is one of the wealthiest people in the country, a titan of industry. So I was running this organization in Vail, and he was presenting for us on private equity. And so I got to know him. He invited me over to his house, and I'm in my 20s, right? And this titan of industry, it's like, come over for coffee tomorrow. I was so excited. I'm going to be able, one-on-one, to pick the brain of this captain, this general. So I go over to his house, beautiful house in Beaver Creek, and I go in, I got all my questions that I want to ask him, and I'm this little kid. And we sit down, and like 10 minutes into the conversation, he's found the one thing this 20-year-old punk kid knows more than him about, which happened to be the bioavailability of CoQ10, of vitamins and supplements. And he's asking me questions about vitamins and supplements. And I left his house, and I was like, like, what just happened? I just got hit by a truck. I didn't get anything. I got the most important things. He had the humility, the confidence to learn something from this 20-year-old kid. And what he demonstrated, what he showed me in that interaction, is a lesson that has lasted 2 decades. Probably a lot longer and a lot deeper than if he had just told me, hey, be curious and learn things from other people.
It's true. And also what I hear in that is he didn't need to be the leader, right? People who need to be the leader take over. He is naturally a leader because he doesn't need it. And he listens, and he, so that's a big component of it. Those who I know who need to be the leader most, you look at them and go, I ain't following them, right? Oh, they might motivate me to do something, but that's not me following them.
I made that mistake for a long time. My ego needed to be the leader, but I didn't know what a leader was. I could craft great strategies and direct people on how to execute those strategies because I wanted the validation and, the ego reinforcement of being the one out front that people looked up to and admired. And it took a decade of hard work to really look at myself and get to know myself and then accept myself and failing over and over and over. And where I eventually got is like, I don't need to be the leader because I know I am that. I know this intrinsically, not with ego. There are just components of who I am. And I think that's humility, is an honest self-assessment. Good at some things, I'm not good at some things.
I'll say being able to lead doesn't mean you're able to lead in everything. It means you're able to lead in that thing.
Yep.
Right? I'm not going to follow you down certain paths. Right? I won't bust your chops on the air.
Don't take relationship advice from me. Business.
But I think that's really an important aspect of it, is being able to see what I'm masterful at, because I've earned the stripes, I've done the 10,000 hours, etc. And I don't need to lead. And then there are other areas where I'm not a leader, I'm a follower. And that's okay too. For me, I stepped into one of the most problematic professions ever when it comes to leadership, which is the clergy. And I did that for 15, 20 years. And that is a really screwed up starting point because they hire you based on your label, on your title. And it's very hard not to believe that title bestows upon you leadership, as opposed to everything we're describing. And I see so many clergy slip down this path because they believe their title is their leadership. It took me about 10 years to detox myself from this sort of like what you described, to get to this point where I'm not my title, and my title doesn't bestow upon me anything other than the ability to do the job. But that's not leadership.
But it's intoxicating.
It's more than intoxicating.
It's intoxicating when you get put in that position and everybody is looking up at you. You're literally standing on a pulpit, on a dais, and when you're speaking, it's it does some things. And it's why it's no secret to me, particularly, and it doesn't matter what religious body. Mm-hmm. At the highest levels, things like greed, things like sexual misconduct, I mean, they are rampant. Mm-hmm. Because of the intoxication of power, the connection between power and leadership, mm-hmm. when they really don't have much to do with each other.
I was, I think, 2 or 3 years into the rabbinate, and I was flown out to the White House to consult with George W. Bush. And I somehow believed I was being flown out there because it's me. Not because one of my congregants was one of his biggest donors and paid for it and got me into there was a little council to update him on the state of Jewish affairs. And it took me a long time afterwards to believe that it wasn't me that was invited there, it was my title. And that is a very hard thing to hold off in certain professions. I see it oftentimes with people in the medical profession, especially like mm-hmm. surgeons, right? I see it with judges. I worked with a judge once in counseling to detach or detox or disentangle yourself from that confused identity that comes with so much built-in quote-unquote leadership.
Well, also, that's why we've talked about this quite a bit. You know, I've worked with some professional athletes, some entrepreneurs, executives that are retiring. It doesn't go well. Mm. When they lose that stuff and their entire identity is enmeshed in it, and then it goes away, and they haven't done the work to know thyself, that gets real challenging for people real fast.
So true. It's why so many men in particular, you can just sort of chart their demise oftentimes after they retire, and they don't fill the void with something purposeful, meaningful. They don't find a new capacity to channel that leadership quality, right? So what do you do? And that's the beautiful thing about leadership is it's not dependent upon the industry or the widget that you built. You can take that and you can translate it in different directions, leading down to different paths. Here's one that I don't think most people would think of as leadership. I have sat with people at their bedside as they're dying. And there are those who lead and those who don't. And those who lead show us what it means to die. That is a profound form of leadership. We've left the realm of corporate America, and now talk about uncharted territory. We have no frame of reference for it, I have no examples. How am I supposed to learn as a child, as a grown child? My parents, they taught me how to do lots of things. So leadership isn't contained to one little space that occupies a percentage of our life for a period of time.
And the image that I just got, and I love that example of end of life. I've also spent a little bit of time with people at the end of life, more through a Buddhist channel. And that demonstration of leadership where there are no answers. You can't be out in front dragging. And the image that I got is two people holding each other's hands side by side in silence, That's leadership. Sometimes the most powerful leadership has no words. It's just to be. And that goes back to where I started with care. I believe that leaders are what I call care connectors. And a good leader identifies what an individual cares about, and that could be your child, that could be your community, that could be your staff, right? That holistic care, not like I care about comp. Comp is a secondary motivator, right? There's something underlying it. And for different people, it's different things. It can be freedom, security, image, influence, lots of different things. But they identify that deeper care, which goes into meaning and purpose. And then they build a bridge. They build a bridge between what that individual cares about, but they have to build trust so that the person will share it. They have to see the person, hear the person. And then they build a bridge between that care and organizational goals, or what they want their kids to do, or the community, what's in the best interest of the community. They're bridge builders and care connectors. Here's the problem. That takes time. And organizationally, leaders are pulling in a lot of different directions and lots of pressure. Quarterly profits, monthly. This is why I love Enneagram and bringing Enneagram into organizations as one component of what we do, because it's a cheat sheet. It lays out this roadmap so I can figure out where your heart is and what you care about, so I can speak into your listening and build that bridge so there is alignment between who you are, what's important to you, and where the organization is going.
Yeah, and it's not manipulation as some people might hear that, because it's no different than the man who looked into you and saw what you're passionate about, right? He didn't talk to you about what he's passionate about. As an Enneagram 8, I want to be talked to as an Enneagram 8. I don't want to be talked to as other types. It's not cognitive, but that's just human nature. I want to challenge one thing. You said it takes time. And it can take time, but there's an equation in personal development. It's not hard to figure out. It's transformation equals frequency times intensity. Transformation equals frequency times intensity. I can tell my kid not to touch the stove 100 times, and he probably won't touch the stove on the 101st time. I can tell him not to touch the stove once, and if he touches it once and it's hot, he won't touch it again. We've just sped up the process. So intensity. Well, I've seen this in organizations. I've certainly seen it in families, but even in organizations, and we've guided a couple of them, where there's a crisis. Crisis isn't always a bad thing. I mean, I don't wish them upon people, but the Hebrew word for crisis, mashber, means birthing. So it's a birthing. It's the most dangerous day in a woman's life still, and that is also the day where she can bring forth life, right? So in an organizational or a family unit, when there's a crisis, the question is do we use this as an opportunity to draw everybody closer together, to accelerate our growth path together, to build trust together? Because if you've been through a crisis with somebody, right, you don't need a lot of frequency.
And that's obviously another part of 360. And why we chose 360, that hero's journey, right? Going from the known into this crisis, breakdown, threshold moment, being thrust into the unknown from that crisis point, and most people just want to swim back to shore. But if you can stay in it long enough, you hit this abyss, which is just darkness, and you have to descend to come back out. And then you integrate new awarenesses and what you learn in that crisis. There's something that I share. There's two things that I'll share. One, I take people on hikes quite a bit at a place that I work, which is up in the mountains in Evergreen. And the dominant tree where we go are lodgepole pines. Have we ever talked about this? I think we've talked about this.
That's right. They don't know.
So one thing about lodgepole pines, they have a super dense, thick resin. And that it locks the seed away. And there's really only one thing that'll release the seed. It's a raging forest fire that is so hot so powerful it burns down the forest, but that also melts the resin and drops the seed and something new is born. Getting back to leadership, we look at, a lot of people will look at the crisis point and like this, and make an assessment about it. This is bad. Crisis, bad. Growth, good. Not always that way. How many situations in your life did you think at the time were like a train wreck but turned out to be a gift? Or you thought were amazing and turned out to be a dumpster fire? So there's this, I think leaders also have different eyes than most people. Do you know who Tom Watson Jr. is?
Sure. IBM.
Yeah, IBM, exactly. So when he took over the company, I think it was 50s, I think it was late 50s, his father had run it prior to, and IBM did not look like it looks today. They produced punch card systems. So Tom Watson Jr. did a couple things, and he was pretty famous for his vision. He just saw things differently. On the organizational side, he launched this program called System 360. It was the first time that we combined software and hardware. I think it was Fortune magazine called it IBM's $5 or $50 million gamble. It was a lot of money that could have bankrupted the company. Obviously, it worked. It was the catalyst for the personal computer industry, and made IBM, a juggernaut. Now, he's also pretty famous for his perspective in leadership. And I've checked a couple of parts of this story. I don't know that every detail is true. But while all this was going on, one of his young executives made a huge mistake. Cost IBM millions, and that was when millions could, destroy the company. And so, they didn't know if they were going to survive it. So day after this mistake is found out, young executive comes into Tom Watson Jr.'s office, resignation in hand. Mr. Watson, I'm so sorry. I hope you guys rebound from this. Here's my resignation. If there's anything I can do, I'm sorry. And the story goes, Tom Watson sat there for a second, took a breath, and was said to have said, I haven't verified this part, young man, I just spent several $1 million educating you. I'm certainly not going to just get rid of my investment.
Yeah, totally.
How many people look at it like that, though?
Or anything like that, yeah.
Yeah, most CEOs, it's crisis, and what are the investors?
Somebody's head's going to roll.
Exactly.
Who are we going to blame, right? Totally. Back in the rabbi days, I would say, everything I say is true. Some of it actually happened. So whether or not the story is factually true doesn't matter. It's truth. Yeah. So leadership, and as we were talking about this, I thought, I don't know if this is going to be true, but I can see you and I gravitating towards the entry point with an organization or company as a crisis point, right? When they're in crisis, because as a counselor, or especially as a grief therapist, people seek you out when there's pain, right? It'd be nice if everybody was proactive, and there's a percentage of population that is, but most of us react, and when we hit a pain threshold, we need help. But it's also the time when we're most open, right? And I've worked with a couple organizations. They say they want change. They're doing it proactively. The pain point, the desire, the readiness isn't there. And so I keep coming back to this crisis as an opening, as an opportunity. And as we're talking it through with leadership, people who can see crisis as an opportunity, right? Like Tom Watson Jr. And that's gets me into the Enneagram, because a lot of people have a misconception that the true leaders are Enneagram 3s, the achievers, 8s, the challengers, and 7s, the enthusiasts. They tend to make the most wealth. I have a friend who's a financial planner, Mick, who says 80% of his clients fit those bills. They tend to rise to the top in corporate America. They tend to command an audience. But I've read many studies. There was a long-term study on leadership, and it disproved that idea that there's only one way to be a leader, and that's that charismatic, and it's that out front and sort of look at me. And part of, I think, what I see when I'm working with leaders is those who are the most compassionate, the most hopeful, right? The ones who can see the budding tree and all of the raging debris of the post-forest fire, like they have some magical qualities around leadership that I don't think we usually attribute as leadership qualities.
Two things come up for me. The first is Nelson Mandela. He didn't have tools at his disposal. He certainly didn't have authority. He was in jail, right? He inspired a movement. He sparked the inspiration in millions to end apartheid. Gandhi, I would imagine probably not an 8.
I think he was a reformer professional.
But he cared.
Yeah.
And he demonstrated that care. And this is, the Align 360, this program that we've created to bring into organizations. The alignment is one component of it, with values and mission and meaning and purpose. The thing about those guys that you just talked about, oftentimes they grow so fast because they are what I call peak performers. They do it better, faster, more charismatically than everybody else. And so they're elevated, right? You get the promotion because you do it better and faster. And then the things that propel them in their career are what block them from being a leader, right? This is why I actually thought about this because we were combining them, but this right now we're talking about leadership, and then next month we're going to talk about success, because they're different things.
Oh, for sure.
And I think we enmesh them quite a bit. They are very different things. So that those things that make those guys and women successful are what prevent them from being leaders. Because when people can't do it as fast or as efficiently or have different learning styles, what's the first reaction? I'll just do it. You can't do it.
Yeah. I've worked with a lot of startups. When I was in Israel, I was in that world, and Israel's known as the startup nation. They just aren't known as the scale-up nation. They're great at starting small companies and selling them off. They're not great at growing because the skill set is different. They have tons of visionary, and they're fluid, and they can move on a dime. But that what works in starting up a company isn't the same skill set. And if it isn't, then either you hold on too long and you run your company into the ground, or you recognize that in yourself and you outsource that to another person, or you do the work of changing. Those are your choices.
It is interesting. I think about this sometimes. I think people don't even realize the level of innovation that comes out of Israel, because you're right, they don't. I haven't thought about this before. They don't scale well. The cell phone created in Israel. There's no Samsung in Israel. Motorola just had an office.
Yep, for sure.
It's a different skill set to create a concept. And have you ever read the E-Myth?
I don't think I have.
So the gist is 3 components to a business. You need the visionary. That's the one that's out there, just running forward, big vision, inspiring people. Then you have the manager. That's usually like a number 2. Now we have to figure out how to do this. That cathedral looks great on paper. We have to lay bricks. And then the technicians. Technician is executing the things. And a lot of times technicians create businesses. I'm good at baking cakes, so I'm going to start a bakery. But they don't have any of those other qualities. And I think a leader has to be able to do them all. E-Myth lays it out as 3 components. But the level of cultural distrust that's created when the visionary, the entrepreneur, isn't a great leader, they're just out there and they never meet with their executive team and they're never boots on the ground. So it's like putting all those components together, and that's rare.
It is. So you're not saying that person has to be a CEO, a COO, and a CTO. Those are very different skill sets. What you're saying is he or she has to play their part, and know that they're part of a larger symphony.
Yeah, they need to, and this is know thyself.
Right.
Right? I need to know, and this is where Enneagram comes into, I'm not all of these things. What do I put in place to bridge the gaps?
So almost every startup or Silicon Valley type startup has an Enneagram 5 from the technical side, the investigator, they're the IP, they know the insides of it. And then they have one of those others that I mentioned, this 3, 7, and 8, because they're the ones who take it out to the world. Mm-hmm. And they find each other, a Wozniak and a Jobs, right? You can do that all day long. Like there's these combinations, and I think part of it is just knowing I need other, right? That's part of leadership, right? We have this myth in our society of bootstrapping it. You bootstrap it, you go it alone. He, she, did it without any help. Bullshit. There's no possible way. And if that's how you go about life, that ain't leadership.
That American idea of the self-made person is so ridiculous to me. How many trillions of things, and this is where the Buddhist comes in, and interdependent origination and looking at the whole thing. An entire genealogy that eventually created you in a country where you had some things, and the things that you went through to allow you the skill sets, the relationships that you had. To think I did it is just the most arrogant. I'm very challenged sometimes by those that have that view, whose cups are full. I did it all. I am the greatest.
Well, I did for a long time. That was me.
I know, I kind of did that too.
I wrote a book called Revolution of Jewish Spirit, how we became one of the fastest growing congregations in the Northeast when I was there. And there was a lot of I in there. I reread it and I was embarrassed because it was I did this and I did that. And there was a we. There was so many we's. Like there was, I had ideas I did not execute. So it's embarrassing, I think, and that's part of like what it means to become a leader, is to say, in front of millions of viewers, because I know millions of people are watching this. But that's what a leader does, right? You do that accounting, you own it, you fix it, you change directions, right? You're humbled by it. And
What is the book? Laws of Power or something? Mm-hmm. Laws of Power. One of them is you give away all the credit.
Robert Greene, maybe?
I think that's right. I'm not positive. But yeah, you give away all the credit. I didn't do it. There's, I'm going to butcher it, but in the Tao Te Ching, Taoist book, it says a leader leads by, the translation I'm going to butcher right now. Don't judge me. Stop judging me. A leader leads by emptying people's heads and filling their hearts. The part that I like, and this is where I'm not going to do a good job of it, it's basically along the lines of, the leader leads, and when the work is done, everybody says we have done it ourselves. With no thought of the leader. And I just thought that was a beautiful image. Leading without anybody knowing that you are leading. And it goes back to one of the first things you said, which is a leader doesn't need to lead.
But so maybe we're like our podcast is going to revolve around ancient wisdom texts and modern application in business.
We got a few of those.
But there's a rabbinic tale, it's in the Talmud, that says, great rabbi died. And everybody, the world fell apart because he was the center of the world. He was the leader. And, one rabbi steps in and says, I'm going to take over because I'm the inheritor of his knowledge. And another one says, I'm the, inheritor of his oration, his speaking skills, oration skills. And another one says, they just do this all day long. And then one guy just steps in and says, Hineni, here I am. That's all he says, right? And to me, that's that impulse to just step in when you're needed. It's kind of that simple. Just say, here I am. And that, to me, gets us to the heart of leadership, maybe where we start to wrap up.
I really just want to keep sharing ancient wisdom stories and get into Wei Nung and the Platform Sutra, but I'm going to keep it contained. Yeah, I mean, this is a big topic, right? And it's a big topic in personal life and families and communities. Obviously, a huge one in organizations. And I guess for me, I would wrap up going back satellite view. Obviously, there are a lot of inherent problems with the systems that we live in. It might be creating wealth and innovation, but is it creating peace and happiness and connection and love and fulfillment? What is the idea of success? And we'll get into that next month. But I think one reason that we have so much discontent, so much dissatisfaction, everybody confusing more with better, and I need to just elevate status and bank account and all that, is when you have the people that you described, right, the 3s, the 7s, and the 8s, that get successful and are given the authority of a leadership role, quote unquote. And we care more about bottom line than human beings. More about profits than the human experience. It isn't just in the organization. And we think, a lot of times I think we think they're mutually exclusive, that to incorporate those things, human beings, care, connection, into organizations is going to hurt the bottom line. It doesn't, and I'm not going to get into all the data. If you do it skillfully, you can Adam Smith economics it, and everybody wins. And the thing is, why I'm glad that we're doing this together, is because it's not just in the organization. When people feel seen and heard, when they help co-generate a vision and have a leader that sparks that inspiration in them and shows a path and builds the bridge of care, the ripples of that are infinite and unknowable. The way it shows up in their homes and the way those kids take it into schools, the way it influences communities, the way that organizations that do business that way influence our models and our cultures and the systems that we work and live within, that is what affects real change.
I just saw the movie Reagan, and so you made me think of this. You know, he had the trickle down economics, right? I've always seen this as trickle down transformation. You know, if I can work with a leader and get them to this place and space where they're just living that 360, everything we've talked about, it trickles down. It trickles out to their employees, it trickles out to their stakeholders, it trickles to their home, and so forth. And so, you know, if you're listening to this, right, like, this is why we do the work on ourselves. And sometimes people think it's selfish to spend this much time on ourselves, to get an executive coach, which we, both do for this reason, because I'm happy to work with the employees in a company, for sure. But if and when you can work with the executives, it's a hell of a lot easier to create sustainable transformation and this holistic transformation that you're describing. And so, trickle-down transformation.
Scaling heart-based influence.
Love it. To be continued, my friend.
Thank you. I thought that was good.